All right, guys, can y'all hear me on the computers? Am I coming through okay?
Yeah, I can hear you good.
All right, great. Well, guys, thank you for the opportunity to speak. For those of you that I've kind of met or seen before, again, my name is Brett Jones. I work with what's Greenpoint Ag, and we already had this conversation a little bit there a minute ago. What is Greenpoint Ag? So I did work for Tennessee Farmers Co-op, but several years ago, we started forming joint ventures with different departments of the business. So Greenpoint was what was formed with Tennessee Farmers Co-op and Alabama Farmers Co-op with their agronomy departments. So the products that you buy at your local co-op come through Greenpoint Ag. So we supply the seed, chemical, and fertilizer that before were coming through TFC out of Laverne. So just a little bit of difference. Mainly in the name there is one of the big difference, but hopefully better buying opportunities by getting larger is the goal, to be able to buy better, to be able to produce products at a better price and better opportunity for you guys in the end. So tonight we're going to be talking about baleage. Was the topic that I was asked to discuss. Yeah, that ain't working. Actually, it ain't advancing at all. Screen or not. It may be. There we go. I still got you guys on the other end.
No, we don't. Well, I'm looking at Jason. I'd rather see this PowerPoint. It's Jason.
We're trying to get it where we can advance the slides also. Let's see what we got.
You got it now, Chris?
Yeah, I got it now. There we go.
All right. So tonight we're going to be talking about baleage, was what I was asked to talk about. So how many of you guys are doing any baleage now? Okay. Doing a little bit of maybe dabbled in it. Maybe you guys are thinking about it that haven't done it. Okay. So we're going to kind of talk about that a little bit, try to go through it. There's a lot to unpack here, really, when we start thinking about it. There's a lot of things that we can go into. So I've got several notes here that I'll kind of be referencing a little bit to try to keep me on track, so I don't. So I'll make sure and cover all the areas we want. So basically, what we're talking about with baleage, what you guys tell me? What does it mean? Think about baleage. What are we talking about here? Okay. Yeah, high moisture hay. Okay. Yes. Another advantage is getting faster out of the field there, getting it cut and wrapped and out of the field quicker. Okay. Yeah. Down at a low moisture, like at a conventional 12-15% moisture or something. Okay. Just using it for storage. Yeah. Okay. Great. If you guys that are listening in, the folks here in the room here at Hartsville, we're talking about ways that they're using it and talking about getting the advantage of getting out of the field quicker. Got one gentleman here is using it, and I've read several folks doing that before, using it as storage, wrapping it, putting up conventional dry haylage, but wrapping it for using that as your storage. Definitely a way to utilize that for sure. But baleage in general, when we are talking about baleage, we are talking about that high moisture hay typically. When we're talking specifically, and you're doing some of that as well. Yeah. Wheat, Sudex, yes. We'll talk about that here in a minute. Several products that we look at traditionally to put up there. Absolutely. So where are we wanting that moisture? When we're talking haylage, what kind of moisture? We're talking about high moisture. We talked about, what are we talking about there? What kind of moisture ranges are you guys targeting or thinking?
50, 60.
Yep.
40 to 50.
Okay. Yeah. Why?
I got tired of soupy hay.
Yeah.
So just enough to get it fermented.
Yes. So y'all kind of right on cue. Isn't that 40 to 60% range? That's kind of where we want to be in there. We're going to talk about, some dangers getting on either side of that, really, and some issues that we can have if we get too high, or if we're getting too low, because as you mentioned, if you you want just enough to get it fermented. Okay. So there's some advantages to that side of it too. And we'll kind of discuss them a little bit. Some of the advantages of baleage in general, one of the big things that we look at is actually being able to get hay up quicker, yes, but being able to get it up in a better quality. You know, getting that forage up at a better quality, because when is that forage at its very best quality?
Boot stage.
At the boot stage. But what I guess I'd worded that a little bit. Yes, it is. But from the time that we cut it, it's going where? It's going downhill. The longer we leave it out there, yes, boot stage is probably the very premium of that. And I asked that question a little bit wrong, because that was the answer I was looking for, was more of, you know, when we cut it, it's going downhill all the time, right? The more we handle that hay, the more we ted it, the more things we do with it, we're constantly bruising that hay. So you've got areas that we're losing nutritional value potentially all the time. Also, we potentially are knocking leaves off, right? Especially if we get into a legume crop, right? We're knocking those leaves off. If we're knocking leaves off, we're losing really what we're really after. The things that we're mostly after there, we're very easily knocking them off and leaving them behind, okay? So it's at the very top, you know, when we first cut it, that's as good as it's going to be, right? Now, what we've kind of had a misnomer or a wrong impression of sometimes, some people think, well, we can take poor hay, and if I make it into baleage, it makes it good hay then, right? No, I mean, bad hay is bad hay, right? It's not going to make it any better by that ensiling process, but sometimes we've kind of had that idea or that impression sometimes. Some other advantages of doing baleage or putting up baleage is that time you mentioned about getting in and out of the field, right? So what happens in the springtime when we're trying to put up hay? It's going to rain, right? You know, we've got small windows that we're dealing with a lot of times, small windows to be able to get our hay down to the moisture we want it to be able to put it up dry, especially. Okay. And especially if we're in tune to, as Jason mentioned, in tune to the growth pattern of these crops. Well, we've got to be really early looking at that, right? You know, even fescues and our orchard grasses, you know, typically we are cutting them way too late. Okay. They're in the boot stage really, really early. Okay. Now, traditionally, we haven't had ways to be able to capitalize on that, right? Because what good does it do to cut down hay in April if it's just going to get rained on and just rot in the field, right? But now if we have the ability to look at wrappers, to be able to put this up in higher moisture, now you've shrunk that window down tremendously of being able to just get that crop down to 40 or 60% moisture range and be able to get it captured and get it harvested and put into the barn, or not in the barn, but in wrap, as opposed to letting that lay out there for a week and get rained on. And every time it gets rained on, the quality continues to fall as it kind of respirates again and again. Another thing that potentially we can be looking at is actually getting more tonnage out of it. It was an interesting study. Here it is. Showing that very thing. This was actually on Bermuda grass down in Georgia. And several things I'll reference from some very good publication out of the University of Georgia that I referenced a whole lot. They've got some really good information on their website. But what they did in this study, they said, all right, we're going to take a 25-acre block of this hay, 2 25-acre blocks, and one side they're going to cut it when the weather's right. Okay, when the weather's right, so it's good to be able to cure hay, we're going to cut it. And the other side, we're going to cut it when it needs to be cut and put it up in baleage. So you didn't have that window. But in this particular study, they were actually able to get 2 more cuttings out of the hay and baleage. They were actually able to get 2 more cuttings through that season, because the other times, hey, it was time to cut it. It needed to be cut. Weather didn't allow, right? So they had to wait there. So they actually were able to get that off, allow it to start regrowing, and allow it to grow again. And you can see what they got off of. They got 259 bales versus 479 bales. Now, you're talking, you know, wet hay versus dry, so you have to factor all of that out. But in the end of the study, they got almost twice as much hay off of the baleage side of it because of the extra cuttings and allowing that to regrow and come back. Okay. Also, you've also got the issues of loss. So we talked about losing those leaves. As that dries down, we've got potential for that loss. And we've got loss in a lot of our hay handling, right? You know, almost every way you look at the way we handle hay, a lot of times we've got some loss that we've got to deal with, right? Whether we're talking about as it's drying down in the field, whether we're talking about storage, you know, I like the idea you're talking about wrapping that dry hay. You know, if at all possible, we need our hay in the dry some way, right? And then not to mention then the feeding loss that we have. And the worse it is up front, makes the worse the feeding loss is, right? Because we're giving them a poor quality in the end there. So you can look at this study, showed the hay with no cover on the ground and the hay in barn stored and then baleage. And if you look at the harvesting, it was the same on the first two because that was the same process, right? And you look at 7 to 15% on the hay versus the baleage side was all the way down to 3 to 10%. Okay.
Come in and harvesting.
So a lot of that comes in that drying process. That drying is that plant is drying down and losing that moisture. That moisture is actually carrying nutrients with it. So, and it's amazing how much that actually drops. It's more than what you would think about.
Is that volume?
Yes, that's overall percentage volume. Yes, sir. Now that does vary depending on, I think the wide range in this study was based on, you know, how long it had to stay out there, you know, so because depending on the time of the year, you know, sometimes we can put hay up in a day or so, right? Dry. Sometimes it takes, you know, depending on if we're in the spring of the year, it could be a week there, right? So that's where the difference is on that. The storage side, you look at, you know, and here in Tennessee, we've had such a blessing with ag enhancement, right? With the TAEP stuff and helping us get these barns up that so many of our farms never had place to storage. We personally have put up a couple of barns, and it's such a blessing to be able to do that. And you take without that, you know, you're at 20 to 40% loss there, and you know that's a big range too, right? But I say again, that depends a lot about where you store that hay outside. Traditionally, we've nearly always been bad about sticking hay where? That's right. Out of the way, under the trees, you know, so it's not on our field, right? And that makes sense, you know, why we're doing that, because we're wanting to capitalize all of our field, but in reality, it stays wetter. The sun never dries it out. So we get so much more spoilage and so much more waste there. Versus you go to that barn and hay stored, you know, you've got that down to 2 to 10%. Okay. Your baleage, you know, you're harvesting, you're getting it out very quickly. So a 3 to 10% loss there. And on the storage, you know, very minimal. Then when you carry that over to the feeding side of it, you've got a pretty big difference there too. You know, your hay that is stored outside, and that's why that 5 to 25%, you know, because, well, where was it stored?
Who wanted that?
Was it stored?
Because I love them.
Why?
Thought we had a question for a minute.
Then she told me Mark was fixing, and I said, okay, you were about to get
The 5 to
crystals. I said, "Ooh,
25% is a big part of where is that stored. You know, if it's stored around the tree line, you'd probably be at that 25%. If you were storing it, even though it was outside, you were doing your very best to get it up off the ground. Maybe on some gravel where water could get away from it or something, you could mitigate that a little bit. But look over here at the total loss when you get to the feeding side and you factor all. In a better place all the time with the stored hay. Hopefully we're being able to store, or maybe covering it in some form or fashion. You know, we are just getting and doing a better job of putting hay up better. Our equipment has improved so we can get hay up more timely. So all of that goes together. Now, when you carry that out, they also did a study, and that's what this bottom chart is. This is the same study where they were looking at, you know, the quality by those timely harvests, by getting it up when it's right. You know, what does that do for your overall quality? And then in turn, what can our animals do with it, right? Because we're trying to get something best to our animals to be able to allow them to grow. And what they did, they took some really good Bermuda grass hay, and they took some ryegrass baleage and some ryegrass hay, okay? So basically the difference in these two are the losses that you're getting by drying it down. By that drying process, what you're losing some of. Because, I mean, let's face it, that's really good stuff right there. 15% protein, 62 TDN, that's good stuff. And ryegrass is really good stuff. But look, they were capitalizing on some more of those nutrients that we were losing by drying it. And the big difference, you look at this relative feed value or the relative feed quality right here, is where it really, they kind of compile all those numbers together with your protein, your fibers, all your digestibility, kind of roll that into something that's a little bit easier to understand. And you take some really good Bermuda grass hay, was at 116, and you jump the baleage ryegrass up to 174 and the ryegrass at 133. Now, is baleage the cheapest way to put hay up? Absolutely not, right? Now, a neat thing they did about this study, they showed you that very thing, that, hey, even though it cost more, they tracked the average daily gain. So they figured in the average daily gain, and when you were getting so much better gain out of this, that actually when they factored all that back, it was actually cheaper than the regular ryegrass hay. The baleage was actually cheaper based on the percentage gain they were getting. These were on heifers, is what this particular study was on, which, that's really the backbone of our operation. If we're growing our own heifers, and if we're keeping our own heifers, that is really the background of a lot of our farms. Advance me there, Jason, if you can. I think it's locked me up again.
What's that cost of gain? That's it.
How was that figured?
Yeah, that wasn't per pound of gain, well, it cost per pound of gain.
Yes. I think that's how they figured that. They figured in the average daily gain and the cost of what it took to put that ton of hay up, and factored that back through.
That's the cost of gain for animals.
In that particular study, I think it was, which does look pretty high. Mm-hmm.
That's more than the value you pay.
But you're only on hay right there.
Yes, you're on a short window there. You're concentrating, and you're on those particular heifers there. It's let's see. Yeah, that's the one we're ready for. And I agree, that does look, I didn't actually pay attention to that pure number on that, but it does look pretty high. I will agree. Okay. So when we talk about baleage, and somebody touched on it a minute, one of you talked about kind of what are we going to bale as baleage? Okay. So what forages should we be looking at, or what forages are we typically looking at to put up our baleage? Okay. Ryegrass, crimson clover, Sudan, wheat. Okay. Covered a lot of them right there, didn't he? So first of all, we do want good quality stuff, right? Because it does, as y'all have alluded to, it's not cheap, right? It's not cheap to go this route. There's expenses that we have to incur to be able to get where we can handle it. There's the cost of plastic, which is pretty expensive. So we have to factor all that in. So you want to start with a really good crop to begin with. We don't want to just, if some of our crop is over mature, hey, that may not be the one we want to look at. Okay. But the crop that is in good shape, the crop that is where we want it to, this is actually some triticale here. Good opportunity. Summertime there, sorghum, Sudan grass. That was some other that we put up in there. Now that's not really what we want to put up in baleage there, right? The sad part is we're cutting a lot more of that across our hay fields when you look at the territory than I would like to say that I wish we were. So that's not what we want to put up in baleage there, right? So we do want to start with the right forages. And the right forages, one thing to consider and think about on that is typically we want to be looking at those that have got higher sugars in them. Those higher sugar contents is what really helps the fermentation process. Now, to kind of oversimplify that, one of the easiest ways to look at that are typically annuals. Typically, annuals are keeping their sugars up in the plant, where a perennial is putting those sugars towards the roots. Okay, so they're having to put more sugars down in their roots to be able to help that plant to come back. Okay, to be that perennial plant, where the annuals are allowed to keep more of those sugars up in the upright plant because they just got a short lifespan from the beginning. So just like ones you mentioned there, summertime wise, you know, even a crabgrass, we got a lot of folks that are doing crabgrass now, and I think y'all may have had a seminar on crabgrass, and that's one I continue to get more and more questions on is crabgrass. Crabgrass, even though we don't think about it, we think about it as a perennial because it's there every year, right? But it's actually an annual that is just a very prolific seed producer. It comes back from its seeds, so the sugars are really good in it as well. So it's a good candidate for that. Okay. Now, can you do other forages? Absolutely. You could do your whole crop if you wanted to, but you definitely, particularly if you're starting and looking at that, we want to put up some of the best forages that you have. Those are the ones that we really want to look at and want to focus on. Okay. So when we think about making baleage, what do we need? What do we need to make baleage? If you've never done baleage and you decided this year we're going to do baleage, what are we going to need? A lot of money and good credit. Yeah, I mean, beyond just that. Okay, equipment. Yep.
30 grand right there.
Yes. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. So there's a lot of equipment things to consider, right? Now, one thing that we can consider is using a lot of the equipment you already have. Okay. Now, do I want you doing that long term? No. You're gonna wear it out, right? If you're going to be focusing heavily on baleage, you're going to have to get the right equipment to handle it. You're going to have to get that stuff, right? But now we've got a lot of folks that are using a lot of the equipment they already have to harvest the hay. Now, as the wrapper, and we'll touch on wrappers a little bit, there's a lot of times folks in the area that maybe have wrappers that are doing some custom wrapping in a lot of places. There's folks that are going around doing custom wrapping. There's some areas where folks are going together and buying a wrapper and say, hey, let's three of us go get us a wrapper. Yeah, see that a lot.
Me and another guy, he lives in Knoxville, but we live down here. We just share the wrapper. He
Right.
uses his in the spring. I use mine when we can.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So there's ways to get around some of the costs, right? And like I said, there's some that are doing custom wrapping. They're coming around, hey, we got one, it's sitting in the barn and we're not using it this summer, hey, would you wrap some for me? So there's some ways to kind of get around that to some degree. A crimper usually works really good, helps to make that a little more uniform when we're trying to get that to dry down, particularly when we get to sorghum Sudan families and those bigger stemmed families. I prefer still crimping it. Now there's some disadvantages to that as well, because as this windrow there, you're not getting sunshine on as much of that either, right? So there's kind of some advantages and disadvantages to that. Now you might could open these up a little bit and get those to cover a little bit more. There's some arguments, that they want to see the ground, to allow the ground to dry out first before they scatter that back out, particularly if we were doing dry hay, right? It's an advantage for that ground to go ahead and dry up sometimes, okay? One of the big things and maybe a challenge is the rakes that we're using. If you've ever done any baleage, particularly if you're more on the 60% side, if you're at 40%, it handles it easier, a wheel rake. But if you're got a lot of heavy mass there, heavy moisture, particularly if we're in that 60%, sometimes a wheel rake has a lot of trouble pulling that in. Okay. It can have a tendency to leave that behind. I've got one customer that does a whole lot of it. That's his gauge wheel. His gauge wheel, he uses a V-rake, and if it's getting where it's cleaning the ground, just cleaning the ground, he says it's just right for him. You know, that's kind of his gauge wheel because it's the rate that he has. And it's still in enough moisture that he is able to get it to ferment very well. He's been doing it for a long time. But the folks that are doing, and that picture stayed behind instead on top of it. But anyways, that's, you see these rotary rakes, okay, these double rotary rakes. More and more folks are going to those if they're doing a lot of this, because this stuff is just so heavy. If you're talking, you know, 60% moisture on a lot of this stuff, it's real heavy. And whether we're talking, you know, ryegrass or sorghum Sudan grass, sometimes the ryegrass is even heavier because you've got so many stems in there. So a lot of folks that maybe you tried for a few years and say you're ready to go all in and you're needing a rake anyways, that may be something to look at on the rake side.
I got a rotary rake.
Like it.
You got
Yeah.
a double or single? Single. Couldn't afford a double.
Yeah, yeah.
Couldn't turn it around on a potato.
Do it, yeah.
Couldn't turn it around while I'm up.
Right, right. So some other, and we'll touch on here in a minute, are the potential, particularly of dragging up some debris off the ground, particularly more manure, more potential diseases off the ground. And when you're dealing in these high environments, that's where we do have potential for some poisoning, some botulism poison that you can have in there, some bad molds. We're going to talk about molds here in a little bit. You know, similar, you could grab that stuff and pull it in, similar to like if you were to rake a dead animal in there. And as that's decomposing, very, very toxic on that. So we have to watch, you know, kind of what we're doing on that. What do you guys handle it with? I think both of you guys are doing a decent amount of, what are y'all raking with? You got a V, just a wheel rake? Okay, yes, yes. Yeah, that's another way that several do it, is just leaving it right behind the swather, you know, right behind the disc bind and never touching it. And that's, so you're definitely probably in that 60% moisture range most of the time doing that, aren't you? So you're raking it. Of course, you're down in the 40, you like to be in that 40% range more so too.
You use a conditioner and you're rolling it up like that. It takes a while to dry it out. We go right behind it with a tedder and spread it out
Yes, sir.
so that it'll dry.
Yep, right.
The only problem I've seen, and I use a lot of Sudex, is you make it so many trips over the field, your second stand is terrible.
Yes, sir.
So this year we went in, and after we cut it the first time, we went in and spread, we whirlybird some millet in it. Well, our second crop of Sudex and millet was thicker than a cat.
I like that
It
idea.
was
Yeah,
thicker than hair
Yep.
on dog's back.
yep. Several.
And it made it hard to dry down. too.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. And
Drill it in? Cast it?
just broadcast
Did
it.
you drill it in or broadcast it?
What's that?
Did you drill it in?
No, we just spin spread it.
Yep, just broadcast it over the top of it.
Come off pretty
Yeah,
good.
it does. It does. You know, a couple of things there you touched on. One, you know, if we're cutting it at a good height where we should be, particularly our sorghum Sudan grasses, I'm really alluding to, it is going to come back quick, right?
Yeah.
It's coming back real fast. And getting that off of there, the quicker we can get it off there, that is a premium. Now, going right behind the swathers, a lot of folks are doing that. A lot of folks are doing that, particularly if we've got a good, heavy enough crop that we're not having to run over the field, you know, a tremendous amount. That definitely helps. Now on balers, you know, I made the statement that you can use, sometimes you can use the baler that you have. You know, there's a lot of, you know, decent, not real old, but decent balers that have got some age on them that folks have baled a lot of baleage with. Now, it is harder on them because if you're going to be doing a whole lot, especially a true baleage baler is going to have heavier bearings. It's going to have heavier rollers in there. It's going to have scrapers that are helping to scrape the rollers to keep them cleaner. Because this stuff is so moist that we're dealing with, it has much more tendency to build up on that. So,
First thing you gotta do is cut the side of your roll down.
yes, yeah, we're going to touch on that too. Yes, sir. You've got to. That's right. You're not going to go bale a 6-footer out there. You're not going to. That's right. That's right. that is part of the, y'all are right on schedule, okay? Y'all are right on schedule there. Is the size of those bales, right? We have got to cut the size of that bale down. If you've never done that before, you're thinking, hey, I'm gonna cut it back a little bit. I'm gonna go roll a 5-foot roll out there, a 5x5 roll or something. Good luck. One, your tractor and baler is gonna know it, and if it lives through it, then when you get ready to move it, good luck. Okay, you may not pick that thing up, and then you're gonna break spears, which you may do anyways. Okay, that's just almost a casualty of war, right? That it's very, particularly if you try to feed these bales, even when you get them down to, because we're wanting bales, most folks are wanting in that 1,000, 1,200 pound range. Does that sound kind of what you guys are targeting? Typically that's where we're at. You're basically double a dry roll of hay. You're basically at 2x the weight of a dry roll of hay. So you've got to think about handling that. And if you're handling with a 2-wheel drive tractor, man, just even added weight on those front tires and picking the rear tires up as well. And back to those spears, a lot of folks that broke spears, they pop them just quick as can be, especially if you try to put the bale off in the ring or something, it runs out on the spear a little bit, or you don't have that spear pushed all the way up going across the field. A lot of folks broke spears, and that's kind of a common thing that a lot of folks get into. So we do, and you got to have enough tractor to carry it. When you're handling a 1,400 pound bale, 1,200 pound bale versus a 700 pound bale, it's a lot of difference there. So we've kind of got to plan ahead on that and make sure we do have all the equipment that we need. Another thing I wanted to touch on as we're talking about where we're here, thinking about the equipment that we're getting there and getting that down. One of the most common problems that folks do probably when they start in the baleage, and I'd say you guys could probably attest to that have done it, is cutting down way too much. If you think you're gonna go in there and cut down like you are with dry hay, is that gonna work?
One time they run 3 disc mowers 2 days. It rained for 2 weeks.
Yeah, they knew they'd messed up for several more weeks, didn't they? But what is our slow point typically with baleage? What is the slowest point in the baleage? Do it. Yeah. Yeah. Typically the rapid. So we really have to gauge how much we want to cut from the end point backwards. Think about how long it's going to take me to wrap this. Think about where I've got to carry it to wrap it, because we've also got to be thinking about that. We've got to be thinking about, all right, come wintertime, I got to feed this stuff. Okay. Now, yeah, this may be the easiest place to wrap it right here beside the field because that's where it's at. But guess what? When wintertime comes, I'm going to be feeding it 3 miles down the road. That's not where you want that. Okay. So we've got to take all of that into consideration about from the very beginning and from up front as far as where we put it and how we want to handle that. And definitely that is probably the biggest problem that people run into when they first start doing that, is they cut out way more than what they can handle, because we've been typically cutting for 3 days, with disc mowers, thinking, hey, we're going to get it all up, right? Because we're going to go in there and bale, and we'll move it when we get time, right? It's a different game. You got to bale it, and we got to get it wrapped tonight. Okay, we got to get it wrapped now. I know folks that go all night. When they decide they're going to do it, they get in there and they just keep going.
Tell me that's the only piece of equipment he ever bought that had a set of lights on it for a reason. Most times you have to add them. He said that one bought with lights on it.
Yep, that's exactly right. It's a different mentality. Okay. And that's kind of a lot of what I wanted to talk about tonight, that, you guys are doing it. You could probably be the ones who are talking to me about it. Hopefully I'm giving you some ideas and some thinking points as well, but particularly for the guys that have never done it. There's a lot to think about. There's a lot to process here. And I don't want you going out and buying all brand new equipment and never doing this before. You know what I mean? And that's what I kind of wanted to give you a little bit of insight here too, that, hey, maybe some of the equipment I've got, I can try it. But you do have to be cautious, because you can tear up some good equipment too, by putting too much there. Okay. Advance me one more there, Jason. It's froze again. Another thing to think about when we start thinking about the balers and stuff is when we're doing this, you know, we all like to bale nice looking bales, don't we? I do personally, you know, I kick a bale out, you know, I can't help myself. I'm, you know, making next round, I'm always want to look back. Oh man, that's just a little bit, you know, if I the only one that does that, anybody else guilty of that? I got a couple people smiling. Okay. Now I just like that. It stacks better, you know, it looks better, stacks on the trailer better, all that. Well, when we're doing this, it actually gets more crucial. Okay. Because we want those barrels sitting there like batteries best we can. Okay. Because they are a little uneven there. We've got some gaps. And I'm not sure if the picture I put in there shows it or not. Go to the storage picture. Yeah, right, the rapid. Yep. So that one you can see a little bit. You can see a little, still pretty good out through there, right? And the hay I baled this year, I thought it looked really good, man. And when I got it up, I thought, man, this doesn't line up like I really wished it would. But anytime we've got some of those variances, if you get very much, that's a area for oxygen to be, more oxygen to be. And what we're doing by wrapping this, we're cutting oxygen off. That's the critical part. That's why we have to be so fast. That's why we've got to get after it, because you've got to get it there. We've got to get it sealed. We've got to get the oxygen cut off to it so that it starts the ensiling process. So it's going to fermenting and protecting this hay versus going more towards spoilage and waste. Okay. So that's why the closer, the better condition we can put them in, the better. Now, when we start thinking about wrappers, which is another piece that we have to have, the previous slide showed an inline wrapper, right? Now, those are more efficient. Okay, you can do a whole lot more with those, probably double. Okay, now, does that mean that's the only kind to have? Not necessarily. Okay, the individual wrappers here, they are slower, so that's a disadvantage. And you do have to probably more times than not use a little bit more plastic, which drives the price up, which is the disadvantage. Okay, a lot more plastic. Okay, now what do you have?
Booms, 1,500.
Okay, do you have an inline? You have a single wrapper. Now some advantages.
Bale, plastic wise.
Yep. Yeah, I'm not surprised at all. Not surprised at all. There are some advantages too, though, right? Yes. Yes. So you can control kind of what you're doing. You can wrap it as you're going. Now, is yours attached to your baler, or is it a separate machine? Okay. Another thing is if you ever wanted to sell some, okay, it's a whole lot easier to sell individual bale versus breaking a tube and selling. Okay. So there are advantages to it. It's easier maybe to go and do custom jobs or help out a neighbor with smaller acreages also. That's another opportunity, possibility to be able to do. But when we think about storing it, and we think about, you can see some of that, those are actually pretty good bales there, it looks to me like. I can't claim those, but I like the look of them. They're really out through there, so you've got a lot of that oxygen cut off to them, and a lot of that's protected. Okay. Now, if you've never done any of this, never seen any of this, they're already feeding out of this, okay? Somebody's already feeding out of this picture because normally this end would be capped and sealed as well. Now, another advantage to the individual wrapper is because once we start feeding this, we got to keep going, okay? Once we start feeding this, we're giving oxygen to the end of that tube, okay? So we got to keep feeding. We got to keep feeding. We need to be feeding really at least a bale off that each day. Really don't want over 2 days especially, okay? But now you've got to have the number of cattle there to be able to clean that up too, right? Because once we take that out, that is the negative, or one of the big negatives of baleage is once we break that out, it starts degrading really, really quickly. We need to get the cattle eating that. They need to be enough mouths there to clean it up. And we've got to be able to keep this stack fresh by getting another bale out, okay? Because if not, that's where we can really start losing a whole lot. Another thing about this picture makes me think about is where we're going to do this. You know, I talked about we got to think about where we're going to feed it, okay, in relation to the field. And that may go into our plans of what we want to plant this summer to even harvest for this, okay? But another thing is, particularly in these lines or in these tubes, you know, we want to orient these, if it's up and down the hill, we want it to be up and down the hill. We don't want it to be across the hill. You have a lot of water coming there and it's going to be a bad day for you. Okay. So you definitely want it up and down the hill so it doesn't hold moisture in behind there any more than we have to. Also, it's best to get these out from away from the tree lines as well, because we don't want any more rodents, any more birds or anything perching on this and poking holes in this. Anytime holes get poked in this plastic, you're giving opportunity for oxygen to get back in there to start either to one, if it hasn't fermented, you can lose the fermentation process, or later on, if it's broken, then you're introducing oxygen, it starts breaking down, and possibly some molds getting in there as well. So getting them out away from the tree line helps that a lot of times as well, to be able to help protect that. And we do have to scout these. You know, we need to keep an eye on these. If you do see holes, you need to get out there and get some tape on that, and not just duct tape. It needs to be the right tape. And most everybody says you need to put a cross on it, put double tape on it, because one just is not enough to keep that oxygen in there. Okay. We need to be putting a crossways and coming across it a second time. Okay. To double that up, because let's think about it. How much plastic are we putting on that to begin with? Are we putting just one wrap on it? Okay. 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah. A lot of folks putting upwards of 6 on there. Okay. That's not uncommon at all to put 5 and 6. So, you know, you're putting multiples there. So if you go back and try to slap one piece of tape over it, well, that wasn't going to work from the beginning. It's not going to work now either. So putting two crosses over that a lot of times really helps to be able to protect that and to be able to help it. Another thing is the plastic itself. Yeah, go back one slide. I wasn't sure where I was at. The plastic itself, and I know Jason and I kind of discussed this a little bit. He asked if I'd ever had any trouble with certain plastics. And I haven't, other than one time, and I think it was some that was a little bit older stock, is I think what was going on in our situation. But you've got to have good plastic that still keeps its tackiness, so that when you're wrapping that, it's sticking and sealing, but it also has to have that elasticity. Okay. You want this stuff to stretch about 40%. You know, it's kind of like a saran wrap. You know, you pull around something, that's where it sticks and sticks to that. I saw a neat little thing somewhere that talked about to check it, take and make you some marks on the plastic before you stretch it an inch apart. And then when you stretch it, it should be between 1.6 and 1.7. Those marks that you made. I thought, man, that's pretty slick. I like simple things. That's just the way my mind goes. That makes sense to me. You know, you can see that stretching there. Now, Jason, I know y'all were having trouble with it. Got hot, started breaking on you, wasn't it? It just got so hot, and you know, every time, and man, you talk about frustrating, you know.
Keep it in the machine until you're ready to put it on the wall.
Yeah.
There's no sense putting it on the machine.
Yeah.
Carry one with you.
And like I say, that plastic is expensive.
I hope you use 1.3 or minimum.
Okay, yeah, higher meal plastic, 1.3, and I think that's what you said. Y'all went up some, didn't you? Okay.
For years, we use Sunfilm. Hey, Sunfilm probably, that's what your co-ops are gonna carry. That's their main supplier. But they changed their parent company. They've been bought and sold a couple of times. In the last 10 years. And so I think, I don't know if there's a change in manufacturing process, but there's a change in their plastic. So, and it worked, and then we used it early, but, I haven't opened any of ours that I wrapped with, 1.3. But I can tell you, the bales look better, you know, looking outside, and they're just the consistency of it. They don't overstretch it.
So definitely there could be differences in those plastics, you know. So you do have to, you know, like I say, it's not, as everybody's alluded to, that's probably one of the more expensive points overall is the plastic. You know, that's where you're adding 8, and I feel like that's conservative. I've heard more of $10 a roll for the plastic is kind of where if you'd have just asked me, I would have said 10. Now, once we transition and we've put it up right, you know, we've done our best all year to put it up. We've spent all summer trying to protect that investment, and now it's time to feed that, right? So as you're feeding that, you know, you've got several things that you want to watch and look for. And a lot of people talk about just the smell test, you know, and that is something to kind of keep ongoing, which non-farmers, I guess, would disagree with me on that. But, you know, to me, that silage, I grew up raising corn silage, you know, that silage smell, I like that smell. It just kind of brings back good memories. Now, you know, if you're not in the farming business, not been around it, you might think that's a bad smell, but to me, that's a good smell. It brings back fond memories even, you know, that smell. But now if you start smelling that rotted smell or very, you know, just a very pungent smell there, that's a bad day. You need to be investigating that more. There is a distinct difference in that, that fermented smell versus that other. Okay. So we definitely want to keep our noses out for that. Pay attention, you know, pay attention to that. Keep our eyes out, for mold. You know, if you see some white mold on it like that, probably not a big deal at all. The white mold there is probably not a problem. That's a bigger mold that doesn't get in their lungs, doesn't really cause a problem. Okay. That's just, and you're probably not going to see a whole lot of that. That's probably just where you had a little hole or a little something going on. Really not much of an issue. If you start seeing these blues and greens though, you got a problem. Okay. We got a major problem here. If we start seeing those, that's probably more of an indication that we've probably put it up really, really wet. You know, we might have been a lot higher than our 60% even. We put some up, a couple of years ago on a test and it kept fine. But it was up in the 70% and I was scared to death of it, but it held all right. But just being very, you know, and I know most of you are probably doing this all the time, but just always keeping an eye out of, you know, just like watching our equipment, right? You know, we want to be very aware, listening to our equipment as we're cutting hay or whatever, you know, just paying attention to what's going on and being very aware of that. If you notice something really changes in that, you may want to put a halt on it, you know, see what's going on there, because we definitely don't want those bad odors and we don't want these different colorations there. What we want is we want good quality forage. You're putting it out there. And again, you're putting it out there to a number of cows that are able to clean that up. So the way that we've been feeding this at home, is we've actually been waiting to feed what baleage we have. We wait and feed it to a group of cows that have just had their babies. So their lactation is up. So their requirements have peaked right there. So we wait to feed it to them because we don't put up a whole lot of it. But also I have to wait until I get enough in that group that they can clean it up. Okay. I don't want it out there sitting out there for 2 or 3 weeks. That's where I'm going to have a lot of waste. I want these cows, these animals to really clean it up, ideally in a day. I really want them putting it out, eating that in a day and getting them another one. That's really where I want to be. But really, you know, just don't want to prolong that very long time. I have covered a whole lot here in 48 minutes. He said try to keep it to 48 minutes and or under an hour, 45 to an hour. So I was trying my best to stay on pace with that, but it is a lot to cover, right? It's a lot to unpack there. There's similarities, right? And if you've done it, has anybody else done it? I know you 3 guys have done it. You know, once you've done it, it's kind of somewhat old hat, just like anything else we've done. But even then, you're constantly learning, hey, this works a little bit better. Maybe behind a dismower or behind a conditioner, baling it right in the row works for me. You're going to find tweaks and all that work for your business. Each of our farms are just different.
You check your moisture anymore, or are you pretty much still by feel now? Have you done it enough this season?
I've not. I've not.
Ever checked your moisture?
Yes, definitely have checked my moisture. So we've actually sampled and sent tests off of it to try to fix. I've not been doing the microwave test. That's probably one of the better ways to do it. I've got a moisture sensor. I get numbers all over the board with it sometimes. Yeah.
So when you get a good one, you just go with it.
Yeah, right. Find what you're looking for, just go. Don't take another one, right?
Like your blood pressure.
Do I am?
So looking at the machinery show, girl trying to sell, she's got a probe, and she's got one that mounts on a roller. Now she sticks her hand up to both of them, and they're like 30% difference. I was like, what the hell's the point of this if there's 30% difference between a probe and a
Right,
kit that goes
right.
on a roller? Have you known anybody use a kit on the roller?
I have it on,
It'd be-
yeah, I have it on a roller. I have on some big square balers. Some guys have used those. To me, it's almost not as much the number as is the consistency. Because if it's mine, I'm gonna learn, hey, it's off, but if it's consistently off, I know to adjust that, right?
Roll after you roll.
After I'm rolled it. After you rolled it.
How much
Within
will
3
it-
hours.
3 hours?
Yeah, I'm talking about, you started.
All
All right, Chris is, if y'all want to finish up, if anybody on here has questions, feel free to put them in chat and we'll ask Brett and I'll let him answer those.
Okay, Jason.
I try to do like, about 100 to 120 bales a day. You know, so we're doing 12, 15 acres, because I'm getting, how many bales you getting on a good, you getting 8 bales an acre?
Yeah,
Best I've ever done is 10, and that was just a freak. But usually 7 to
And then
8.
how long does it take you to wrap it up?
Questions, they can unmute, you can unmute and ask as well. We can do that. Or if they want to put them in the chat, whichever way, if someone has questions, we'll try to get your questions answered.
Well, it depends on how many people I got helping.
Well, that's not a problem.
Yeah.
I am not here.
Yeah, listen. It's the only thing when everybody else leaves. I shredded.
Well, Chris, I didn't see anybody post any questions. Chris, do you have any questions or anything?
I don't. Thank him for the presentation.
All right. Well, I sure do appreciate everybody hopping on. If y'all have questions, get with your agent, holler at us. We'll get back in touch with Brett. Some of the things the guys mentioned here, they're discussing moisture testers. It's what they're talking about.
I got a question that says, how do you check the moisture? And what's
All
a
right.
microwave test?
Is Mr. Mark, is the microwave test, I could go through the process. Is because Brett said he hadn't done that, so I'll cover it. I've done it a lot myself. Is you actually get a sample of the hay before you roll it and weigh that sample. Typically 100-gram sample. And that 100-gram sample, you would, once you weigh it, you put it in the microwave for about 5 minutes with a cup of water. And when you go through that process, you do that a couple of times. Every time you turn that sample and you change that cup of water until it stops changing weights. Once you get 2 weights that are the same, then you can you go through that process. So, but is get with your agent or send us an email in there, Mark, and I'll send you the process. If you see it on paper, it's a whole lot easier than explaining it. Any other questions? Is Nick, let me ask Brett and I'll let him answer that question. Hey, Brett, we got a question. And so, Nick asked, is it critical to get the hay wrapped as soon as possible? How forgiving is the hay?
So yeah, I want to get it rolled just as quick as possible. Ideally within a few hours, definitely not over 12. If at all, I can get it, ideally 3 to 4 hours, I want it wrapped. Really not over 12 is where I want to be targeting. Yes, sir.
All right. Did that get you, Nick?
Yeah.
All right. Any more questions? If there's no more questions, thank y'all for joining us. Chris, I'm gonna go ahead and end the meeting.
All right. Thanks, Jason.
All right, thank you.